There is a room beneath the Vatican that has no official name. It does not appear on any architectural blueprint ever released to the public. It is not mentioned in any papal decree, any museum catalog, or any press release from the Holy See. And yet, it exists. Archaeologists know it exists. Certain cardinals know it exists. And a very small group of historians, the kind who publish in journals almost no one reads, have been quietly circling it for decades. They call it, in whispered academic shorthand, the Chamber of Time. Not because of what it contains, but because of what its contents should not be. In early 2026, something shifted. After years of what the Vatican described as structural assessments and archival reorganization, a controlled delegation was permitted entry. No cameras, no live stream, no press conference, just a brief, curated statement released 48 hours later that said almost nothing, and somehow said everything. The statement used one phrase that has not left the minds of those who study these things. It said the contents were consistent with the Church's understanding of history. Not that the contents confirmed it. Not that they supported it. Consistent with. That is a very careful sentence. That is a sentence written by someone who knows the difference between agreement and carefully worded distance. And that distinction, that single, almost invisible distinction, is where this story truly begins. Think about what we assume history is. We assume it moves in one direction. Forward. We assume that ancient civilizations knew less than we do. We assume that the further back you go, the simpler things become. Mud bricks, oral traditions, fires lit by hand. The entire architecture of modern education rests on this assumption. Progress is linear. Knowledge accumulates. Civilization builds, slowly, from the ground up. But what happens, and stay with this question, what happens if certain rooms, in certain institutions, hold objects that quietly, undeniably, refuse to follow that rule? What happens if something found in the deep archive of the oldest institutional power on Earth suggests that the line we call history has a bend in it that no one has officially acknowledged? That is not a rhetorical question. That is what several credentialed researchers are now trying to answer. And the Vatican's partial opening of this chamber in 2026 has given them, for the first time, something they did not have before. A thread. A single, fragile, extraordinary thread. And when you pull it, the fabric does not hold. To understand what was found, you have to understand what the Vatican Archive actually is. Most people imagine it as a library, shelves of old books, illuminated manuscripts behind glass. That image is not wrong, but it is catastrophically incomplete. The Vatican Apostolic Archive contains over 85 linear kilometers of shelving. 85 kilometers. If you laid every document end to end, you would cover roughly the distance from Rome to Naples. It holds records dating back over 12 centuries of continuous documentation, papal correspondence, trial transcripts, property records, diplomatic cables from courts and kingdoms that no longer exist. It is, without exaggeration, the most complete institutional record of Western civilization in existence. And it has a section, officially catalogued as Fondo Speciale, or Special Collection, that has never been fully described to the public. The Chamber of Time sits within this section, or rather, below it. Here is what the official statement acknowledged. The chamber contains objects and manuscripts acquired by the Church during what it calls periods of significant territorial and missionary expansion. That phrase covers a span of roughly 1,400 years. It includes the Crusades, the Inquisition, the colonization of the Americas, the systematic suppression of indigenous knowledge systems across 3 continents. The Church, during these centuries, did not merely convert, it collected. Priests and missionaries brought back to Rome not just souls, but objects, artifacts, texts, instruments, many of which were never catalogued publicly, many of which were stored away not because they were irrelevant, but, according to at least 3 historians who have studied adjacent archival records, because they were inconvenient. But here's what makes this strange. The official statement released after the 2026 delegation described one category of objects that does not fit the standard narrative of religious acquisition. It referred to what it called pre-Columbian navigational instruments of unknown provenance. Not European instruments, not instruments from the known Mediterranean trade routes. Pre-Columbian, unknown provenance, in a chamber beneath the Vatican. That combination of words should stop every rational person cold. Because pre-Columbian navigational instruments of serious technical complexity should not exist according to the trajectory of history we have been taught. And if they do exist, if they have existed in this chamber, possibly for centuries, the question is not just where they came from. The question is who knew and why the knowing was kept so quiet for so long. That is where the story shifts. In 2003, a Vatican archivist named Father Pellegrino Ernetti, a name that appears in the footnotes of several unusual academic papers, reportedly submitted an internal memo requesting reclassification of certain items in the Fondo Speciale. The memo was never publicly released, but a reference to it appears in a 2019 paper by Dr. Miriam Kastner, a historian at the University of Bologna, who was studying church responses to pre-modern technological artifacts. Kastner did not claim access to the memo. She cited only its existence, as referenced in a secondary document she had obtained through a formal archival request. What she noted, with careful academic restraint, was that the items flagged for reclassification were described in the secondary document as objects whose temporal origin cannot be reconciled with their apparent function. Read that again. Objects whose temporal origin cannot be reconciled with their apparent function. That is a precise, institutional sentence. And it is a sentence that means something very specific. It means someone inside the Vatican, decades before 2026, had already identified items in their possession that should not, by any conventional understanding of when human civilization developed the relevant knowledge, actually work. We need to slow down here because this is the moment where most discussions of this kind go wrong. They leap, they speculate, they reach for the dramatic conclusion before the careful one has been fully examined. So let us stay careful. The existence of anomalous artifacts in historical collections is not, by itself, proof of anything supernatural or conspiratorial. Historians know that ancient civilizations were more sophisticated in certain areas than our standard narratives suggest. The Antikythera mechanism, a 2,000-year-old Greek device of extraordinary mechanical complexity, sat in an Athens museum for decades before researchers understood what it actually was. The Baghdad battery, the Saqqara bird, the Dendera reliefs. In each of these cases, objects existed that created genuine, documented scholarly debate about the boundaries of ancient technical knowledge. The Vatican artifacts may belong to this category. They may represent a missing chapter in our understanding of pre-modern engineering. That alone would be extraordinary. That alone would be worth decades of suppression if the implications threatened certain foundational narratives about who first sailed where, who first calculated what, and who first understood the geometry of the stars. But here is where the complexity deepens. Because the navigational instruments are not the only objects the 2026 statement referenced obliquely. Buried in the fourth paragraph of that carefully worded release, and you have to read it several times to catch it, is a reference to what it calls bound textual materials in a script not yet fully identified. Not yet fully identified. In 2026. With the resources of the modern world, with machine learning translation systems that can decode ancient scripts in months, with universities dedicating entire departments to exactly this kind of linguistic archaeology, the Vatican has had these materials for an undisclosed period from an unspecified origin, and the script has not been identified. Either that is a genuine linguistic mystery of staggering proportions, or the identification has been made privately, and the phrase, "not yet fully identified," is doing a great deal of quiet work in a public statement designed to minimize engagement. Both possibilities are, in their own way, profound. Let us talk about what it means when institutions decide what history gets to say. This is not a radical statement. It is a historical fact. Every major civilization has had mechanisms for managing memory, for deciding which stories persist, which records are preserved, which discoveries are celebrated, and which are quietly set aside. The Library of Alexandria was not simply destroyed by fire. Historians now understand its decline as a slow, political, multi-stage process spanning several centuries, during which certain texts were copied and distributed while others were not. The suppression of Galileo was not an aberration. It was part of a systematic, centuries-long management of the relationship between institutional authority and empirical discovery. The Church was not uniquely evil in doing this. Every power structure does it. Universities do it. Governments do it. Corporations do it. The question is not whether history has been managed. The question is what was managed and what the management cost us. Because here is what gets lost in the conspiracy-inflected version of this conversation, the version that is loud and crude and easy to dismiss. The real cost of historical suppression is not dramatic. It is not secret societies and hidden codes. The real cost is quieter and stranger. It is the shape of the questions we never thought to ask. It is the scientific hypotheses that were never formulated because the evidence that might have prompted them was sitting in a room beneath a Renaissance palace, waiting. It is the centuries of intellectual energy spent reconstructing, painfully and slowly, knowledge that may have existed in a different form, in a different tradition, in a text written in a script that, as of the writing of this, has not been fully identified. That is the real weight of what the Chamber of Time represents. Not a scandal. A gap. An enormous, ancient, civilization-shaping gap between what was known and what was allowed to be known. And now, for the first time, a door to that gap has been partially, cautiously, conditionally opened. The delegation permitted entry in 2026 included 4 individuals whose credentials have been confirmed by independent sources: an archaeologist from the University of Vienna, a linguist from the École Pratique des Hautes Études in Paris, a conservation specialist from the Getty Institute in Los Angeles, and a 4th figure, described only as a consultant to the Holy See, whose institutional affiliation has not been publicly disclosed. Their findings have not been published. The Vatican statement confirmed they were granted access. It confirmed they reviewed materials under supervised conditions. It confirmed that a report was submitted to the prefect of the archive. What happens to that report? Whether it enters the public record, whether it is shared with the broader scholarly community, whether it becomes the foundation of a new chapter in our understanding of pre-modern civilization, remains, as of now, entirely unclear. What is clear is this: 4 serious researchers with serious credentials from serious institutions went into a room. They saw something. And the institution that controls the room chose its words, in the public statement that followed, with extraordinary, almost surgical care. There were no sweeping declarations, no dramatic revelations, no admission that anything in the chamber contradicts what we know. Just that careful, loaded phrase. Consistent with the Church's understanding of history. Not identical to, not confirmatory of, consistent with. Which leaves open, like a door not fully closed, the possibility that the Church's understanding of history is itself a thing that has been curated, shaped, maintained, and that what sits in that chamber may represent the edges of the shape, the places where the official map ends and the actual territory continues. There is a concept in philosophy of science called the underdetermination of theory by evidence. It describes the fact that any given body of evidence can, in principle, support multiple competing theories. The evidence does not choose between them. The scientist does. And that choice, which theory to pursue, which to set aside, which to publish, and which to leave in a drawer, is never purely rational. It is shaped by careers, by funding, by what is considered respectable, by what challenges existing frameworks and what confirms them. Now, apply that concept to an institution that has been curating a specific theory of human civilization for 2,000 years. Apply it to an institution with 85 kilometers of shelving and a chamber whose contents were not made public until 2026. The underdetermination of theory by evidence at that scale, across that span of time, does not produce small distortions. It produces fundamental ones. It produces a version of history that is not wrong exactly, but that is incomplete in ways we may be only beginning to measure. This is what makes the Chamber of Time significant. Not the fantasy version of it. Not the version where alien maps and impossible machinery overturn everything we know in a single news cycle. The real version. The version where serious researchers, working within serious institutions, are beginning to gently, carefully, persistently ask whether the account of human intellectual development we have inherited is the complete account. Whether the line from primitive to advanced, from ignorant to knowing, from ancient to modern, whether that line is actually a line at all, or whether it is something more like a circle, or a spiral, or a shape for which we do not yet have the right word. The Vatican has opened a door. It has not thrown it wide. It has opened it precisely as much as an institution of that age and weight and complexity opens anything, which is to say, just enough for light to enter, and just little enough for the full picture to remain, for now, inside. But light is entering, and the researchers who were in that room have seen things. And the world that studies these questions is not the same as it was before 2026, even if the official record has not yet caught up with what that difference means. Watch what comes next. Watch which journals accept papers about pre-Columbian navigational complexity in the next 18 months. Watch which university departments quietly expand their focus. Watch for the linguistic announcement, because there will be one, eventually, about that unidentified script. It will be framed as a minor discovery, a footnote in a specialized publication. But read the footnotes. The footnotes are where the real history always hides. They are where the things that were too significant to bury completely, but too inconvenient to headline, end up living, quietly, waiting for someone to look carefully enough to see them. You are watching because you look carefully. You are here because you understand that the most important questions are rarely the loudest ones. They are the ones that sit in the fourth paragraph of a cautious official statement. They are the ones that live in academic papers that almost no one reads. They are the ones that a very old institution, in a very deliberate act of partial transparency, has just, for the first time, allowed to exist in public. The Chamber of Time is open. What it contains is still becoming clear. And the process of that clarity, slow, careful, consequential, is exactly what this channel exists to follow with you. Not to tell you what to think, but to make sure that when the thinking happens, it is thorough and honest, and equal to the weight of the questions being asked. If that is why you are here, stay here. There is much more coming, and the deeper we go, the more necessary it becomes to go carefully, together.